Bob Herbert's op-ed.tv is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation with the support of Ann Ulnick. Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to op-ed.tv. When I became a reporter in 1970, we were in something like a golden era of professional journalism. Jobs were plentiful. Much of the coverage out of Vietnam was extraordinary. The civil rights movement was documented by many first-rate and brave reporters and photographers. The New York Times and then other publications would soon be publishing the Pentagon Papers. Woodward and Bernstein would win a Pulitzer Prize for their outstanding coverage of the Watergate scandal, and so on. How things have changed. Donald Trump now refers to hardworking, responsible, mainstream reporters as enemies of the people. Legitimate journalism outlets are hemorrhaging jobs. And my guest, Eric Alterman, the media columnist for The Nation magazine, has just written a piece lamenting the fact that on social media, toxic lies and rumors are in many cases filling the space once occupied by professional, evidence-based journalism. So we have a lot to talk about. Eric, welcome. Thanks for coming in. I am not for a moment suggesting that journalism was perfect 40 or 50 years ago, and obviously there is still a lot of outstanding journalism being done today, sure. But the landscape has really changed. What happened in those 4 or 5 decades?
That's the only question.
That's the entire show.
Yeah. 3 big things off the top of my head. Maybe I'll forget 1 or 2. The first thing is that the period that you're talking about, the Golden Age, was a period when newspapers were able to organize eyeballs and sell them to advertisers. And there was no connection between what the eyeballs were reading and what the advertisers were selling. So you could spend a fortune on covering a war or overseas and so forth, and then sell advertising to people who only read the sports pages,
right,
or the style section, whatever, the ladies' pages it was called in those days. And that model has broken down. So now advertisers can target the people they want to reach, and no one's paying for war coverage or coverage of global warming or stuff like that. There's an old saying, I forget who it's attributed to, but he said, I know I'm wasting half my advertising, I just don't know which half. But now they know exactly who they're reaching. Right. And so the model for gathering news you need rather than news you want, for gathering spinach rather than pudding, has totally broken down, and no one has figured out how to fix it.
And the gathering of news is incredibly expensive.
Right, and people have come to expect it for free. That's number 1. Number 2, around the same time as what you're talking about, a whole bunch of conservatives got together. It was a little before that. It was after Barry Goldwater lost the '64 election. And they figured out, and they were right, that the national news media thought they were a bunch of jerks. And in fact, James Reston, the great New York Times columnist after Goldwater lost, said the only hope for the Republican Party is to become more liberal than the Democrats if they want to stay in business. Right. And these guys figured out, as long as the media thinks we're a bunch of jerks, we're never going to be able to get our message across. So they invested hundreds of millions, maybe billions, I would say, in building up their own media establishment, think tanks. And these are people who today don't take facts seriously, don't take science seriously, don't take anything seriously that contradicts the power that they enjoy. And so Trump is standing atop this entire edifice of a 40-year attack on truth, on evidence, on normative news, because it doesn't sit well with people, the people that Fox News reaches, right. Breitbart reaches there. And then the third thing, and I'm oversimplifying everything, is social media. Social media doesn't discriminate between lies and truth, and it just passes along whatever gets eyeballs. Facebook tries to reach people on the basis of what lies they prefer and who they hate. And even most people, non-haters, people who aren't looking for bad stuff about Jews, they don't really notice where the news is coming from on social media. They just see it on their news feed from their friends on Facebook or on Twitter or on Google.
And there is a tendency to believe something you see in print or on the screen in front of you.
Right, and so the people that invest a lot of money in trying to get the truth and do a very imperfect job and always have are competing with people who just don't care. And there's no more money in getting it right than there is in getting it wrong. So we've allowed our news system, our news ecosystem, to be polluted. The way bad money chases out good money, bad news is chasing out good news. And Donald Trump has made a crusade of that.
Your latest column in The Nation has the headline, "The End of News?" ? After it. Are we approaching something that potentially cataclysmic?
Well, I would say that we're already in a cataclysmic position with regard to local news. Because
which was such a big deal when I was talking about that earlier era. If we were talking about the 60s, the 70s, and on into the 80s, local news was a big, big deal.
Right. It's a terrific time to be a corrupt alderman because those news organizations have been hollowed out.
Exactly.
They have television news, which does no reporting at all, and the newspapers who have lost their advertising are just running press releases and are thinner and thinner. It takes about 5 minutes to read most local newspapers. And there's been a lot of hiring in the news business since Trump came to power, but it's 100% of it is on the coasts. It's most of it's in New York, some of it's in Los Angeles, a little bit out in Seattle, I suppose. But basically, there's two problems. One is that it's cheaper to keep people at your base and not send them to again, things that don't bring in advertising. But second, Trump is such an incredible story. You got to give Trump a credit for this one thing. He's an absolute genius at media manipulation. Never seen anything like it. The newspapers, the whole media establishment is helpless before him, including the New York Times and the Washington Post.
Well, he is a genius at media manipulation. But I just don't think there's any reason for the press to be as helpless in the face of Trump as it is. But nevertheless, the press has sort of just been lying down and taking whatever it is Trump is dishing out in terms of coverage. If Trump says this, then we cover this. If Trump says that, then we cover that.
They also let him lie. I mean, all the time.
All the time.
All the time, Trump tweets something, and NBC will report, Trump tweets this, without pointing out it's a lie. Now, if you go deeper into the coverage, particularly the Washington Post, the Toronto newspaper that David Dale works for, they cover the lies. The New York Times runs the fact check, but they don't write it in the story. They don't say, the president lied today. I'm told that the New York Times legal people say, you can't call something a lie unless you can prove intent. And Trump is so careless. He doesn't care if something's true or not. And they say he doesn't know he's lying.
Well, you can say that something is not true. You're not legally vulnerable.
They have lately begun to say that.
Right.
But they won't. But they still repeat it in the headlines.
Yeah.
And they repeat it on social media. And that's all that most people see.
Well, is it just an economic decision, this idea that the news, especially on television, is now all Trump all the time? It's as if there are no other stories in the country. If you turn on MSNBC or CNN, and of course Fox, which is not a legitimate news organization, but if you turn on the tube, it's all Trump. Why is that?
I think it is almost all economic. I think it was Les Moons, the late not lamented Les Moons,
of CBS,
who said he may not be great for the country, but he sure is great for CBS.
Right.
That was during the election. Jeff Zucker has been instrumental in promoting Trump throughout his career, creating a fictional version of Donald Trump, and then at CNN putting on people who knew nothing at all about politics but were willing to support Trump. He treated them as characters in a sitcom and built them up. The most egregious thing CNN has done, and I think any cable station has done, well, leaving aside Fox, is that he put Corey, Lewandowski on air as a contributor. At the same time, he was contractually obligated to the Trump campaign,
Right.
both non-disparagement and non-disclosure. So he was contractually obligated to lie on behalf of the Trump campaign, and yet he was put on by CNN as a allegedly honest, giving his honest opinions. That is just unforgivable, I think. And now, with Trump, he's such a genius. People treat CNN like it's brave and honest because Trump attacks it. You just can't keep up with the guy.
Right. So you mentioned that except for on the coast, some aspects of the coast where there has been hiring in this Trump era, there are all kinds of organizations that are either just laying off people or sort of going out of business altogether. We've seen for decades newspapers just folding. You were talking about local news and that sort of thing. But right now we're in relatively good economic times. Yeah. And you warned about what might happen if there's a recession. You essentially are saying just wait until the next recession comes around.
I feel I put a lot of money on what might happen. I'm saying it will happen.
The recession is inevitable. That's
right.
coming.
And so
explain what's going to happen.
The first thing that companies cut in a recession is advertising.
Mm-hmm.
And most news organizations, the New York Times is actually an exception of late, because it for the first time in hundreds of years, we've got a news organization that's relying on its readers to pay for it rather than its advertisers. But most news is advertiser driven. They're selling eyeballs to advertisers to reach you to buy their product, and that's the first thing to cut. That's the easiest thing to cut because it's not on the payroll. And BuzzFeed, Vice BuzzFeed in particular is doing very well. Vice is doing okay. Other news organizations that their bottom line look pretty good right now because money is not particularly tight. They're cutting people. They're cutting people in significant ways. Either they're preparing for a recession, or their bosses are demanding higher profits. It's probably both.
Right.
But so when things really hit, they'll really start cutting, and there's no fat. There's only bone to cut. So people were originally excited about these new models. I know that newspapers were coming from all over the world to talk to BuzzFeed about how to monetize news.
Right.
And that seems like a dream that has passed. And so we're back to square one, and we'll have a few news organizations that survive because they have global brands. The New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, maybe the LA Times and the Washington Post will do all right because they've got billionaire owners. But by and large, we're just going to lose the kind of news that costs money to produce, the kind of news that either requires investigation or requires evidence that's difficult to get. That's going to disappear.
Right.
And it's just going to be a free-for-all, both for liars who are making up stuff and also for people who are looking to get away with stuff.
So talking about the liars and people making up stuff, you make the point that there are a lot of consumers of news who are unable to distinguish between reputable and disreputable news sources. And sort of, in many cases, just outright madness is taken as fact. Is there someone to blame for this? Is someone at fault? Or is the problem really that millions and millions of our fellow Americans are just too darn gullible to distinguish between what's real and what's not? Well,
the thing about most of our problems is that we've had most of them, but they're out of control today. More and more of them, and that's because our elites have grown much less responsible. They're much more interested in getting rich, and much less interested in having reputations as being patriotic and caring about the future. But there've always been a problem with our elites. They got us into Vietnam. They made a lot of mistakes. They were crazy about a communist scare that didn't exist. But they took seriously the idea that they had a trust from the rest of the country. And that has, by and large, disappeared. so that the people who own these enormous companies like Google, like Twitter, like Amazon, well, leave Amazon out of it for a second because of owning the Washington Post.
Right.
But particularly Facebook, they take no responsibility at all for the content of the information they pass along. So I think that these the old guard looks pretty good today in terms of the gatekeepers that we had. I wrote a book in 1992, came out, called Sound and Fury, about punditry, history of punditry. And I said we need a big injection of democracy into our public conversation. And the internet has actually given us that. And it turns out that that kind of democracy requires the same kinds of guardrails and gatekeepers that we had in the past, and we no longer have them.
Right.
And so now it's impossible for people to distinguish between what's true and what's not.
You teach college students. The real question is, how do we counter this? Is this just a lost cause, or is there something that somebody can do about this? And if so, what is it, and who should be taking the lead?
Two answers to that. One is, I definitely agree it should be done in high schools and colleges. I actually developed a course on media literacy with this in mind when Trump got elected, and I couldn't get it approved by the faculty senate or whoever approves it.
Right.
And I'm sorry about that, particularly because I did a lot of work for nothing. But the second thing that, again, we still have elites in this country. We have these foundations, Ford Foundation, MacArthur Foundation, Lauren Jobs has an enormous foundation, and Carnegie Corporation. And they need to step up. They're uncomfortable with journalism because they can't control it. And they could end up with stories that they would rather not see.
Right.
And also it moves very fast and they move very slowly. But we're rapidly losing the ability as a country to agree on the basic foundations of what we're talking about anymore. And once that's gone, then it's just a free-for-all. I mean, if you look at Trump's government, it's kind of pigs feeding at the trough. I mean, I read today that Fort T-Mobile got the approval to merge.
Right.
They spent hundreds of thousands of dollars staying at Trump's hotels.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's just the old-fashioned naked corruption.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing local newspapers used to talk about. They'd catch mayors and council people, basically quid pro quo, money changing hands.
Right now, part of the problem with Trump is that he does so many outrageous things you can't keep up with them. I mean, if we spent time talking about that, we wouldn't be talking about kids being sexually molested at the border,
right,
for instance, kept in cages. You just can't keep up with how many terrible things that this administration is doing. But the fact is that our elites, I think, have really dropped the ball. They've really decided that they're in it for themselves. That's in part, you see it with the enormous gulf between the 1% of the 1%.
The one, right.
And everybody else. We used to have a relatively decent distribution of resources in this country. And now it's like, oh, that's impossible. What are you talking about? Paying tax rates of the kind that we paid when Donald Trump was being educated, such as it was. So I think, I want to point back to this moment in the 1970s when conservatives built up this edifice to change the way people thought about the public and what it deserved. They made an attack on the idea that there was a common responsibility,
right,
between all of us. They said, no, there's no such thing. Margaret Thatcher once famously said, there is no such thing as society.
I know.
Yeah. So they have actually won that battle. Ronald Reagan said much the same thing, not as eloquently. And now no one is ashamed of the fact that they make so much money, that Amazon made $12 billion last year and paid zero in taxes.
Isn't that something? So explain why what we're talking about is so important. Why are these attacks on journalism, whether it's Trump saying journalists are the enemies of the people, or whether it's the right wing doing this decades-long campaign to undermine truth and meaningful communications, or whether it's sort of what we see on the web today in social media and that sort of thing. Why is all this collective attack on journalism so dangerous?
Okay, there's two fundamental reasons why we need a strong journalistic commitment and foundation in our country. The first one is kind of the obvious one. There's a Tom Stoppard play where at the end of it, one of the characters says to the other, it's important to shine a light on dark places because people do bad things in the dark. And people are going to get away with all kinds of things. Corporations, nefarious individuals, government officials are going to get away with all kinds of things that journalists used to shine a light on and would shine a light on if someone were paying them a decent living to do it. That's number one. Number two, journalism performs a very important task in generating a conversation among people to figure out who we want to be as a country. John Dewey wrote about this in response to Walter Lippmann. Walter Lippmann wrote a book called Public Opinion, which came out, I believe, in 1925, where he said that democracy is impossible because people don't know anything and they're not capable of making complicated decisions. I mean, how can you make a decision about a treaty when you don't understand the treaty? And Dewey replied, it's not important that people know the details of public policy. It's that they know what their values are so they can vote for people who represent their values. Right. And the way they discover their values is by having conversations. And journalism is supposed to stand in for people to have those conversations so they can figure out who we are as a collective society. And if all there is lies and people ginning up hatred and people screaming at each other on cable news and there's no respect for civility and conversation, then that fails too. So we're losing both of these things. And again, I think it's incumbent on the people who are powerful and privileged in our society, like you and me, but people who are more powerful and more privileged, to take this up before it disappears for good.
If somehow you could wave a magic wand and you were in charge of the news organizations on TV or the major publications or that sort of thing, and you wanted to shift the way stories are covered and delivered, so it's not Donald Trump all the time, where would you start? What are just a couple of things that you would do?
When I was a young man, and I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with my career, but I wanted to be a journalist, I wrote a letter to the national editor of the New York Times, and I said, here's the job I want you to give me. I want you to let me cover the United States government from the country. So the government has a policy. I want to go out and see what that policy actually means in people's lives, because there's an enormous disjunction between what politicians say and what actually ends up happening.
Right.
And it's not necessarily going to a bar in Pennsylvania and saying, do you still like Donald Trump? Because those people are speaking still very much about, they're speaking in the same bubble that they were in the first place. Right. They're watching Fox News, they're on the internet, they're on Facebook. I want to know exactly how it's affecting people's lives. Now, we get a lot of that. We get, there's times just today, is doing terrific reporting on the border. But there's all this stuff that goes uncovered, all this stuff from the EPA, from HUD, yep, that is totally gone from the news, and Energy Department, Rick Perry. I mean, terrible things are happening, and you have to be a specialist. You have to do this full time just to find out what's going on. So I would take a look at. I would begin from the prospect that it's supposed to be a government for the people, and I would see what it's doing for the people, and rather than seeing what the people at the top of the government are arguing about amongst themselves.
We're going to leave it there, but I'd love to continue this, so we're going to have you back, Eric.
I look forward to it.
Eric Alterman, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
We'll be back in a moment with a final word. The climate change horror stories just keep on coming. We know about the deadly heat waves on land. Now Kendra Pierre-Louis of the New York Times tells us heat waves are happening ever more frequently in, of all places, the planet's oceans. Pierre Louis, whose specialty is climate, was reporting on a new study that looked at the devastating impact of underwater heat waves on the vast diversity of life in the oceans. The results were heartbreaking. As Pierre Louis wrote, from coral reefs to kelp forests to seagrass beds, researchers found that these heat waves were destroying the framework of many ocean ecosystems. When underwater temperatures are much hotter than normal for 5 consecutive days, it's considered by scientists to be a marine heat wave. And like the waves that comprise a tsunami, they are often killers. Coral reefs, kelp forests, and seagrass beds are among the ocean's foundational species. They provide food and shelter, and in normal times they help moderate sea temperatures. Pierre Louis explains that when they disappear, as they have been doing, the entire ecosystem disappears with them. Even seabirds have been affected. Their food sources often vanish when these aquatic ecosystems die off. Most of us don't know it, but climate change is the biggest story of our lifetimes. We are threatened every bit as much as the ocean's ecosystems. As the temperatures continue to rise, the days of reckoning are coming closer and closer. I wonder when we'll finally start paying close attention. That's all for now. See you next time.